Good evening. It's really wonderful to be here, and I'm really glad that you're engaged in this process. So Mark, my co-clerk of Living Systems, is here, and have invited guests. You'll learn a lot about what they're going to do. But I wanted to mention that we started with a query for Living Systems. And one of the things is we don't really have an answer to this, so you're part of defining even what this question is around living systems or sustainability. And the query is, what if our graduates were transformative in assuring the long-term well-being of their communities? I will repeat it. What if our graduates were transformative in in assuring the long-term well-being of their communities? So one of the other things that fell out from this query is, so what would this look like? And I have no idea. But I'm sure it's going to be like this audience, like really smart and really good looking. And I'm sure that when we begin this process, we're going to look for things, enduring qualities like agility, beauty, resilience, kindness, patience, and love. And I think about my computer, my handheld phone, and I would have never envisioned 20 years ago that I'd have a phone in my pocket, and that it would also be a camera, and that it would also be a calculator, and it also would connect me to my daughter who's traveling in India, and my daughter who is in New York, and my daughter who's in Connecticut, and it's just extraordinary. So we're trying to envision something that we don't know exactly what it is yet, but it's going to have all these wonderful traits. And the other question that came out of this query is, so what do we hope to learn? And I'm not sure what that is yet, but I was thinking about the lasting and salient value of Quakers in America, because we together share this experience of Germantown Friends School. And Quakers came to the U.S. What is their great legacy? Anybody know? The great legacy that Quakers have left us in Philadelphia and in the nation. Oats. Okay, all right. Okay, Quaker oats. I need somebody from the audience to give us a response. Anybody? Friends schools, right. And so Quakers came and they educated first the children of the meeting and then ultimately established schools that are sustainable. They build community through education. And we're expecting through this discernment process with parents, alumni, faculty, and staff to define sustainability in its broadest context. So we're looking for things that may have no price tag. They're changing habits. They could be buildings, but not necessarily. And one example that I found in this process was intergenerational living. The idea that we have older people, middle-aged people, young people together in a community that sustains environments, it sustains community, it sustains learning and living together. So that's our beginning thought about this, and we really want your input, and we hope that this evening the speakers that we have will give a kernel of thought around expanding these ideas. Thank you very much. Mark.
Thanks, Michael. I am Mark Croxford, and I teach environmental science at GFS in the upper school. And to sort of add on and to build on what Michael was saying, I'm a trained meteorologist, and so I see things through a scientific lens. And you probably know today, we're all kind of wandering around, and anybody know what the official high was at the airport today? 73. So how many degrees above normal is that? 27. Very close. So now that's one data point to consider. You can't really hang a trend on one data point, but we know that 2016 was the warmest year on record on Earth. You probably knew that. The global average in 2016 was the highest, which is interesting because that replaced 2015 as the warmest year on record, which is interesting because that replaced 2014 So that's a trend. That's a global average, which is, concerning. And if I know you're probably like me, you feel a sense of responsibility, maybe even exasperation, to do something about this. And I think about the spheres of influence that I have, which usually is my house, my household, my street, maybe if I'm lucky, maybe my neighborhood by extension. But we're at a unique time in GFS's history where we are looking at where the institution should steer towards. It's a pretty neat opportunity. We can affect the community of GFS, and then it's maybe perhaps the region and even the nation. If we are appropriately thoughtful, maybe sacrificial, and allow ourselves to be challenged, I think we could be inspirational. And so that's my hope. So in so doing, Michael and I, when we were asked to lead this, co-clerk this working group, we thought about we should invite some people from the region, from Germantown and Philadelphia, who are already incorporating sort of a sustainable approach, whatever that means, and they're going to define that a little bit later. And we also thought, could we reach out to someone of maybe national prominence who might be considered some kind of an expert? And so we did, and we were humbled and terribly excited to hear back from Bill McKibben, who some of you might know who that is, and allow me to describe him. He's a pretty impressive man. But the Boston Globe said he's probably, this is a quote, probably the most important American environmentalist. And Foreign Policy magazine said back in 2009 that he is one of the top 100 global thinkers. And so to go on from there, the reason probably why that's the case is that he's written 15 books, and many of them champion the environment and environmental remediation. He's incredibly prolific. You've probably read his work in the New York Times, the New York Review of Books. He was a staff writer for the New Yorker, Harper's, Atlantic. It goes on. He also is currently the Distinguished Scholar of Environmental Science at Middlebury. And he has responded to our question in video form, which is terribly, terribly exciting. So about 2 nights ago, I should also tell you that my barber, I was telling my barber, we got Bill McKibben to do this video for us. And he's like, I don't know who Bill McKibben is. And as I'm walking out the door, I look down on the little table he has that has the magazines that you're supposed to read when you're waiting. And Rolling Stone was sitting, the new Rolling Stone, and there was Bill McKibben. And I was like, hey, look, Bill McKibben. He's like, oh, wow. Impressed. So about 2 nights ago, Bill McKibben sat in his loft or attic or something, you'll see, and he thought about what we should think about as in the context we should approach this with, and he gave us some advice. So without further ado, we're going to listen to what Bill McKibben has to say to GFS.
Well, hello everybody at Germantown Friends. It does not surprise me, not one bit, that you guys are about the diligent work of figuring out sustainability for the next decade. Look, the Quaker witness around these questions has been strong from the beginning and needs now to be stronger still. Let me just take a few minutes to bring you up to date on where we are in this planet. You know, I wrote the first book about global warming, a book called The End of Nature, way back in 1989, several 10-year plans ago. And at the time, we knew trouble was coming, but we didn't know how fast and how hard, and now we're in the damn middle of it. We've lost record low sea ice in the Arctic and the Antarctic. The ocean's about 30% more acidic than it was when I was born. We're losing vast swaths of coral reef, of low-lying coastal land now every year. We see remarkable drought and remarkable flood, and of course the hardest part is that the people most affected are those who have done the least to cause this problem. So if we're going to be serious about our love of neighbor, if we're going to take any of those gospel messages with any seriousness, it is a complete imperative that we figure out how to get our own acts together. and cause as little trouble as we can and as much good as we can. Part of that means making the places where we live and work and go to school very sustainable, and the technology exists now to do that. There's no reason not to be running our institutions on 100% solar energy and wind energy and clean energy. 10 years ago, that was a problem. It was expensive, but the price of a solar panel has dropped 80% over the last 10 years, and so we can do it now. As important as it is for us to be doing things close to home, it's also equally important that we be doing our job as citizens out there in the larger world, making sure that our voices are heard. And that's why it's been so good to watch schools, churches around the country get to work finally on these issues of sustainability in really serious ways. We've had this massive, for instance, divestment campaign at colleges and churches and foundations all around the world. We're now up to about endowments and portfolios with a total net worth of about $5 trillion that have divested in whole or in part from fossil fuel, and in so doing sent a powerful message. It's very clear for the moment that our government's not going to do a doggone thing about climate change. It makes it all the more important that we work all the places that we can, and the power of our financial investments is one of those places. And of course, we've had remarkable pleasure of watching young people, high school age, take the lead in so many of these movements around pipelines, around fracking, around all the other things that are going to bedevil their lives more than my life. I'm older. I'm going to be dead before the absolute worst of climate change hits, although it's hitting pretty hard already. But kids who are at Germantown Friends right now are going to be in the absolute prime of their careers just as things start to come apart. And that's what I guess I'd most like you all to think about. Climate change raises issues of intergenerational ethics that we've never had to face before in quite this way. And that means that we need to take leadership from young people. They're the ones with the moral authority at this point to tell us that we need to be making big change. I hope that students, faculty, parents, alumni there will be able to make a big difference at the school and by extension at other schools, but also in the greater Philadelphia area. Philadelphia, as some people want to see become a big fossil fuel energy hub. That would be a bad thing for the future. And to make a difference in the United States and the planet in general. I started 350.org with 7 young people, college students. And it's gone on to be the first big global grassroots climate campaign. It's reminded me that we can make enormous impacts from fairly small beginnings, and I have no doubt that you guys will figure out how to make very, very large impact indeed. Thank you so much for your leadership.
Next, we'll hear from David Young, who's the Executive Director of Clifton here in Philadelphia.
Okay, on that happy note, let me assure you that when the good people at another great Germantown institution like Germantown Friends asked a historian to be part of the Living Systems Project, they probably didn't realize that they were asking an optimistic historian to be part of it. And so I'd like to say that even after Bill McKibben's sobering message, I bring you also a message born of urgency and experience, but also I think one of comfort. And I want to tell you a little bit about the cool place where I work and the cool place where I live, which is Germantown. And how many of you have been to Clifton? How many of you have been to Clifton? All right, it is Clifton on Clifton Street, and a lot of our work has been to bridge that telling disconnect between how the museum has pronounced itself with how the neighbors, young and poor, young and old, rich and poor, white and black, for 200 years have known it as the Chew Mansion on Clifton Street. And it is part of historic Germantown, the most historic neighborhood in America. It's owned by the National Trust for Historic Preservation, which brings with it no funds, but it actually brings that banner of how important Germantown really is. The work we do in Germantown, including at Germantown Friends, has national and international implications. Germantown is the place where William Penn's bold ideas were first tried. And as a result, even a place like Clifton, which stood as a Revolutionary War battlefield on one bloody day, October 4, 1777, it has stood for Germantown, much like Germantown Friends School continues to stand. And this has been the traditional interpretation of Clifton for many years, about the battle, about the fancy sofa, and about the Chews, the family of Benjamin Chew, an attorney for William Penn's family. He was one of the wealthiest men in Pennsylvania, and as an attorney, he never threw anything out. So we have all of his papers, all 240,000 documents of the Chew family records. And those documents continue to reveal, and they reveal quite a bit. They could tell you things, let's put it this way. Do you get your news the same way you did 20 years ago? Do you watch TV the same way you did 20 years ago? Do you go to the movies the same way you did 20 years ago? Well, why would you want to go to get history the same way you did 20 years ago? So what I want to tell you is how Clifton has led a transformation into what it does now, which is, it's a verb. It's not a noun behind a gate. It is a verb to help bring life to history in many ways. And while we were a battlefield and a shrine to a colonial family, we are also now a forum for understanding race, history, and memory in America's most historic neighborhood. The paradoxes in Germantown are very dramatic. So consider, for instance, that Clifton on Clifton Street is a wealthy home to a slave owner that was built by the same man who built the Johnson House, the Underground Railroad station, the Underdog, a block away down the street in Germantown. And consider other paradoxes, like the Friends have patted themselves on the back for the 1688 protest against slavery for quite a while now, but didn't allow blacks in meeting until the 1940s. So abolition didn't necessarily mean equality. History's like that. It's difficult. And Clifton is a place that committed to telling the story that the Chews are among the largest slave owners in Pennsylvania. And when we started our research into the documents to explore the wealth that made a fancy place like Clifton possible, we knew of one plantation. We now know of 9. And we have invited the neighbors in to help us tell the stories because we didn't have the perspectives we needed at a lily-white organization behind a gate on Clifton Street called Clifton to tell the stories we needed to. And as a result, we needed to change our organization. It's one thing to change the narrative from a shrine to a forum, but it's another thing to get an institution to adapt. And that required planning and preparation and leadership to make the transformation. And our key goal was one of the Chews on our board, John Chew, said, if this is the truth, we need to be the place to tell it. So out of that sense of urgency of our community, where history can play a lead role, needs leadership from its historic organizations because we have 16 of them on Germantown Avenue, the longest national colonial historic district in the country. So take that, Boston. So at Clifton, expect to be challenged by the simple fact that American history is difficult. So in order to get the perspectives we needed, we opened up the gates and brought in people who didn't think like us. And they brought their experience into the work of our exploration into these documents. And these Clifton Conversations have been a remarkable 7-year award-winning program. 34 Clifton Conversations have taken place, where the community has come in and heard our updates into the documents. We have now gone through only 20% of these 700 linear boxes of the Chu family papers. And we need more help to do that. And in these conversations, people give us ideas. You know, like you reenact the battle every year. Can you reenact some of the dramatic episodes? This is an image from a conversation held year before last from Joe McGill, who goes around the country sleeping in extant slave cabins. And Clifton was the first one he slept in the north. And this guy who goes sleeping around the country heard on his blog, "Why are you going to Philly? Why are you sleeping in a slave cabin that isn't made of wood, it's made of stone?" And he has now slept in Clifton twice and spoken about it. From these conversations, we have developed a program whereby the teenagers of the city have worked with the Chu family papers to produce a script based on the plantation records called Liberty to Go to Sea. It's a direct quote from an enslaved man named Joseph writing to Benjamin Chu, who asked, "May I have liberty to go to see my wife on another plantation?" Have you ever been in a house and overheard a conversation in another room? That's what this is. And our evaluations talk about the intimate power of this program, which has now won a national award, as a sense of beingness. So in other words, people bring a certain sense into the history with them. And it might be the greatest library in the world, their phone, but it also might just be a perspective we didn't have. And we needed that because we didn't have all the perspectives to tell the stories we needed to tell. So you're eavesdropping on a family through 10 episodes in 100 years of history at Clifton, in the main house where the architecture becomes a character. It becomes a kind of experience. So now we have these two kitchens. You got Clifton and Cliveden, shrine and forum, person and property, a lot of juxtapositions and a lot of contradictions. Well, we have a 1767 kitchen. It's the only known slave cabin that's open to the public in the city of Philadelphia and interpreted it as such. It was opened by the teenagers of the Boy Scouts of Troop 358 across the street at Grace Baptist Church. They're America's first African-American Boy Scout troop. In Germantown, even the Boy Scouts are historic. And 7 Eagle Scout projects later, they have cleaned out the kitchen dependency, and that's where Joe McGill has slept. But we also have a 1959 kitchen, because the Chus lived at Clifton until 1972. And the immigrants who worked in that kitchen cooked Indian food and helped take care of the house. So here we have a 1959 kitchen, meaning this colonial site interprets the 20th century. And it wasn't long ago we had a Clifton conversation where Joan and Matt Countryman talked about their experiences in Germantown. So we have a colonial site that's talking about redlining in the neighborhood, right? That's right where we ought to be. Not just the revolution, but the struggle for freedom in our community. So in these projects, what we've gotten to is a sense of experience. For a long time, history is about the curatorial impulse, the stuff, like the sofa. Also the urbanist, the context. But there's a third thing at work, and that is the experience, like sleeping in slave cabins, or bringing your perspective into the beingness of a place. And I'd like to suggest, as you consider the living system, that these places are adaptations. Joe McGill couldn't sleep in the kitchens or in the slave cabins in 16 states in our country unless those buildings had been adapted and changed. And I'd like to suggest that history has a kind of comfort to it, you know? Domestic spaces, house museums sort of show you how people lived in the old days, the heroes and the shrines. An idealized sense of the past can be very comforting. When something's designated as historic, there's kind of a sense of relief, even if it doesn't guarantee that it won't be demolished. But there's also a sense of comfort that comes from stepping out of your comfort zone. From that challenge of climbing the hill or making that 10K or dropping the holiday weight. When you meet that challenge, don't you feel different? Don't you feel a little bit better about yourself because you've gotten somewhere you didn't think you could go? Well, that's what telling the truth at Clifton has gotten us, to a different kind of comfort zone. And one is where we are hopeful that people will leave with more questions than answers. And I will leave you with this. On November 9th last year, the day after the election, I got 3 calls from a university history program, from a school, and from a church with Jamaican immigrants. And they asked us for some helpful input about how to mediate difficult conversations, like we did in mediating Clifton's conversations about how to give life to the slave papers and the plantation documents of the Chews. So 10 years ago, who would have thought you'd call a historic site for advice on coping with the difficult history that is now upon us? That is our job. History is a form of literature, and it's our duty to rewrite it. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much. In 2008, I was a team member working with the GFS community on their vision for a new science center. The project was an opportunity to learn about the Quaker Way. And the first thing I learned was that every meeting begins with a moment of silence, which is a good thing because every meeting also seemed to start at 6:30 a.m. on a Monday morning. I also learned the meaningful side of the Quaker Way. Most importantly, learned about their process of listening to one another, collaborating, and building consensus. And for that experience, I'm grateful. If we think of innovation and think of Philadelphia, water has always been at the heart of our city's innovation. Built in 1815, the Fairmont Waterworks was the nation's first urban water delivery system, bringing fresh, clean water to a growing city. Today, Philadelphia's innovation is innovating to meet new water challenges. Philadelphia's Green City Clean Waters is designed to address historic neighborhoods such as Germantown and the condition in which combined stormwater and sewage overflows are delivered during large storm events, eroding and polluting our waterways. This program has transformed the way we approach architecture. Now, buildings and landscapes must be conceived as a living ecosystem to protect our water. Oops, can I go back? There we go. The Wade Science Center at Germantown Friends School is an example of such a project. The building and landscape act is an interconnected living system. Through rain gardens in the courtyard, green roofs, and cisterns for water reuse, the stormwater is managed completely on site. Energy is also integrated into this system. A rooftop photovoltaic array, which you can see on the corner, provides 6% of the building's power and acts as a teaching tool. A geothermal exchange well field located beneath the entry drive provides energy for efficient heating and cooling of the building using the Earth's constant temperature. Inside, an interactive building dashboard allows the benefits of these systems to be measured and understood by students and incorporated into the science curriculum. Another example of a building as a living system is the Kensington Creative and Performing Arts High School, another SMP project. Built on an abandoned rail depot adjacent to the L on Front Street in Kensington. Oops. Similar to GFS, the K-Kappa project incorporates rain gardens, green roofs, and cisterns to address stormwater management. Again, the building and landscape are both an ecosystem and a neighborhood amenity. The various green roofs hold stormwater, mitigate the heat island effect of typical roofs, and provide pollinator pathways and bird habitats. In 2011, SMP worked with the school and community to implement a student-led vegetable garden and mural featuring depictions of native plants used on the site. In the lower corner is Jane Rath, who was the project architect, and her daughter, Nora Chase, who's a GFS alumni. K-Kappa became a catalyst for larger neighborhood greening known as the Big Green Block including rain gardens and landscape improvements to the adjacent Schisler Rec Center. Stormwater from the parking lot is now managed in a rain garden. New mosaics on the rec center walls connect this River Ward neighborhood to its historic connection to the Delaware River. Oops. In all our work, we hope to inspire students to be participants in their neighborhood and to be active stewards of the environment. In both schools, sustainable strategies and curriculum have become intertwined. But does the urgency of our climate, our current situation, demand a more explicit approach to teaching about global warming? How can the GFS campus become a living, learning ecosystem and a catalyst for a more sustainable community in Philadelphia? Yesterday, NASA announced the discovery of 7 new Earth-like planets. The boundaries of our living system we are a part of are ever expanding. A few questions. How do we plan for the unknown, for the yet to be understood and the yet to be discovered? How do we challenge the idea of fixed solutions versus scenarios that anticipate the unexpected? Is it possible to imagine a living ecosystem as less about control and more about adaptability and humility? Thanks very much.
I'm not actually using these at all, so do you mind just randomly clicking through them? I don't, it's just to take attention off my face. First off, I just want to thank Michael and Germantown Friends for inviting me, opportunity to speak. It's not an enviable position because I think, as Bill made clear, the clouds are gathering and the road ahead is not certain. And I would hate to think anyone think I'm an expert in what to do next. Luckily, you're not paying me to be here, so that helps. I like to think I set a pretty good track record of balancing, what I see as my innate selfishness with a strong moral conviction to improve the world around me. I like to embrace the challenge of not hiding or somehow suppressing self-care in the name of advancing some moral imperative. That it's okay to acknowledge that we get something out of helping others too. That maybe it's actually critical to our well-being as social creatures to contribute to that wider community of beings. Charity should not be held as a purely aspirational target of what it means to be virtuous, but rather built into our understanding of what it means to be a successful human. There are just too many battles to wage, attitudes to shift, surprises to navigate, that not prioritizing oneself creates worn out and bitter hearts, people too tired to carry on the fight, to share their experiences with those coming up behind, and possibly even doing harm to the movements that they have dedicated themselves to. I believe the best thing we can do for the world is to take care of ourselves and give ourselves and others room and permission to fumble and make mistakes, but most importantly, room to breathe and think, room to reflect and process, to synthesize and dream. I like to think I'm in good company in this room in that regard. For me, this work happens in the garden. And let me be clear before you think that you're going to come tour my paradisical yard and leave inspired by your own patch of green, or that I'm spending weekends happily gardening away and thinking peacefully thoughts. I'm a terrible gardener. And most of my time in the garden is spent cursing at some intractable force or another. If there's anything that's less productive than a frustrated farmer, I don't yet know it. Can you think of anything more useless than yelling at the sun and the soil and the rain? Farming's got to be like one of the things we most comfortably delude ourselves into the thing we have control over. Besides perhaps our bodies. It's also one of the most magical things you can do. Something so small as putting a seed in the ground and watching the magic that comes from that. These plants have millions of years of evolution over us. Best case we learn is to stay the F out of their way, as they do the thing they've been doing perfectly well since before we were fish learning how to breathe oxygen. And if you don't like to think of your ancestors as fish, if I'm remembering Sunday school correctly, I think God gave plants like 2 days before he got around to us. But this frustration is exactly why gardening and farming needs to be part of every child's learned experience, and ultimately why I believe urban farming is important to the ultimate success of cities. It's not to feed our city. We have Lancaster County and South Jersey for that. The fourth most productive farmland in the country, and one of the most productive farmlands in the world. It's to remind us that we're part of larger systems that sometimes are out of our control, that there's not a technological answer to every problem, and that failure is okay and I would say necessary. Farming teaches compassion, patience, sacrifice, humility, flexibility, and new curse words. It also teaches you to be a plumber, a carpenter, a vet, a huckster, a PR mogul, a lawyer, sometimes even a dentist. Farming requires all these skills and more. It's unique and engaging mind and body, often pushing both to their limits. We're often told not to aspire to physical labor in the name of efficiency or to pursue a higher purpose. But I believe that we can't train our next generation of leaders without exposing to all parts of the process, that the world precisely needs more people who know how the sausage is made. Mary and Tom started Greensgrow, and my board will be happy that I finally mentioned it, as a for-profit baby lettuce factory to sell mescaline mix in an iceberg world to Lebec Finn and other restaurants downtown. But they realized almost immediately that A, farming is really hard and scrubbing algae sucks, but that B, farming, especially in the city, is a provocative act, stimulating a very fundamental genetic relationship we have to the world as us as humans. There's something latent in our DNA that still pulls our eye to a red tomato on a vine, the seed in the ground, or green on a new leaf, that really bright, neon green. It's the color of 2017, if people didn't hear. Pantone announced, I guess they're like world color experts or something. Yeah, it's like this, something similar to, I think we branded it. The neighbors who initially threw rocks at the stupid and crazy farmers who couldn't grow a real head of lettuce, they never bought that some people would pay extra for like a smaller leaf. But they couldn't ignore us. Many of our neighbors never buy a thing from us. But they walk by the chickens every day on the way to school every morning, often going out of their way for the experience. They ask when the beehives are coming down from the roof so they can snag the first batch of honey for their Cheerios. They hang out along the fence when we have a party, and they feed Milkshake the pig way too many hoagies. But farming, it's the perfect vehicle to engage everyone in the multidisciplinary physical work that underpins best parts of our society. In 2009, for the first time ever, the majority of the world's population lived in cities. We hit that mark in the United States in 1920, and by the 1990s, more than 3/4 of our citizens live in urban areas. Our ease of connection to the natural world is slipping away. This is why every neighborhood needs a farm, or more specifically, every neighborhood needs a green space that can be farmed, or gardened, or turned into a big mud play pit, or planted with gooseberries or whatever. What I see as the mission of Greensgrow is to prove not only that urban farming can be a viable tool for revitalizing brownfields, creating jobs, helping people eat better, eat healthier, but as an essential element of how we continue to develop citizens that know how to ground themselves in reality, the reality of dirt and toil, even as they progress to that doctor's office, the halls of Congress, the boardroom, or the front of the classroom. Thank you for creating a place of learning that encourages young people to find their passions and follow them, that raises inquisitive minds that will always be unsatisfied with what has come before, and who know that everyone can have an impact. And hopefully kids that also know how to get dirty. That is my wish for you in this process, that you care for the individual over the cause, that you never accept good enough, and that you start planning next year's gathering now, because this work never ends. And I want to leave you with a quote from Mary Seton Corboy, the founder of Greensgrow, my mentor and friend who passed away last summer. Many days and nights I've stomped off, slammed doors, cried the bathtub full of tears, muttering that I was never going to go back to that damn place, only to find myself the next morning, idiot stick in hand, unlocking the gates, ready for battle. I remind myself that I chose this life, that I am proud of this life, that I'm not going to change the world, but I did affect change on one city block, in one city, in one state, in one country, and that some people never get that far. Heck, some people never get out of bed. Thanks.